I didn't sleep. Cadders don't. We file ourselves for a few hours and let the body do repair work while the mind stares at the ceiling like it's an audit form with too many blanks. Ayami had folded into a chair and gone out at a human angle only bureaucrats and cats can manage. Kali puddled across my ribs, purring in a strict 4-count, metronome with opinions. The safe room's ember stones ticked heat like a well-behaved heart under a brass saucer. My chest tried to imitate it and then remembered I was still on manual. I counted anyway. 4 in, 4 out. The room smelled of wax, old tile, and coffee that had learned patience. My eyes stayed open the way doors do when nobody wants to admit they're still listening. Yesterday, I retired. A small life, neat around the edges. Coffee mugs with chips I could name. A desk with bite marks from a cat that wasn't Kalia River, and a city across it that pretended to be mine. I blinked at the ceiling, and the ceiling blinked back like it knew a secret I had signed but never read. Then a coffin, green foxfire, toe tag math, a wand that wasn't a wand until it said my name. Ember stones in a diner basement, humming like domesticated fire, a bureau officer who treated paper like a weapon. A world run on veins of ether and mana instead of wires and outlets. Which one was real? I turned the thought over like a form looking for the misprint. I had retired the day before. That was true inside my skull in the way a long hallway is true. Echoes, frames, doors that open if you don't look directly. This had brick and breath counts, seals that wobbled on purpose, besom bikes whining past above our heads, and a cat who spoke in my mind and tapped my ribs when I forgot I owned them. My hand floated up, slow as a file clerk's lunch break, to the back of my head. Dull throb. The kind of ache a skull gets when it meets stone without an appointment. Maybe I'd hit my head there, and the retirement was the dream. Or I'd hit it here, and this was what happens when you forget to die properly. Kaylee kneaded my sternum once, just to break the monotony, and settled again. "Don't borrow trouble," she murmured, hand to cheek soft in my head. "You owe breath first." "Noted," I whispered, because the room had the quality of places where loud words come within voices. Across from me, the ember stones exhaled their moth-pale heat. They weren't logs. They were river-smooth crystals in a shallow iron bowl, glowing the color of old paper held up to a lamp. No smoke, no ash. Just a slow, steady pulse of summer bound to behave. Warmth, like law, could be convinced to keep its claws in. Ayami had called them ember stones, bound heat that remembered its job. You fed them mana once a week, and they recalled how to be pleasant weather without burning the neighborhood down. The kettle above them shivered toward boil. The keep hot charm etched into its base, catching the emberstone hum like a song it half remembered. Every time the kettle's shoulders tensed, my lungs followed suit out of habit, then faltered. My ribs were still learning they didn't get to outsource this. The wand. Focus, Kali had corrected, with a little spark of disdain, rested in the fold of quilt along my thigh. Dark wood, wire wrapping that drank the green light. It wasn't humming loud. Just there, a tuned string waiting to be plucked by the right bad decision. I reviewed the ledger of me. Recently undeceased. Check. Registered asset. Pending. Person, not evidence. Ayami's project, my preference. Dual name attunement braided into the focus. Me and the child not child of Moss Court. If she dropped, I followed. If I dropped, I'd already practiced. Goal. Find her before the Bureau's arithmetic did. Sub-goal. Keep breathing in 4s. Tertiary goal. Do not steal heat from any more coffee that belongs to women who can weaponize pie. My heart, the idea of a heart, returned in shy attempts like a temp worker figuring out the copier. Once, under the quilts, I got a clear lub-dub. Then back to the hand crank method with Kaylee tapping the cadence against my ribs. Ayami shifted in her sleep, and the cedar fox thread of her charm drifted across the room. She dreamed like she filed. Clauses counted under her breath, 1, 2, 3, and then a door behaved because she had decided it would. Her pen slid off the ledger and clicked against the rug. She didn't wake. For someone allergic to being out of control, she'd made a religion out of trusting small systems, seals, counts, coffee me. I let my eyes do their undead thing, open, lazy, fixed on the way old paint goes hairline at the edge of a doorframe. Stone, wax, cedar. Cold in layers, neon rain out there, a little river breath under the door, a diner bell that had learned to count auditors. The city lay on the other side of tired brick and somebody's kindness. I had the feeling the city kept ledgers too, and woe to those who assumed they owned the pen. 4 in, 4 out. Both lives. Professor Jack Vale and the retired nobody who liked quiet coffee fit in my chest if I didn't force them to shake hands. Carly's tail flicked once, a drowsy semaphore. "You'll be insufferable if you survive," she observed, affectionate as a blade. "I'll aim for merely inconvenient," I said. She didn't smile, being a cat, but her paw flexed. Civilized goal. The quiet held. The ember stones kept everyone honest. Dawn scratched pale nails down the alley window, and the safe room listened to the world make morning out of wet metal and problem pigeons. When the day finally had shoulders, I slid free of the quilts. They poured their heat after me reluctantly. Kaylee flowed after, onto my lap and then across my shoulders, draping herself like a scarf that judged my posture. The focus came with me, weight at my thigh like a promise that refused to be misfiled. Ayami's eyes opened without the fuss of waking. She checked the kettle, the seal seam on the hidden door, and then me, doing a head count of reality. "Status," she said, voice sleep-rough but procedural. "Breath. Running," I said. "Heart auditioning. Existential crisis. On a timer." She nodded once, like she'd expected that exact report. She stretched the kind of stretch you do when you have to be taller than your problems, and gathered her papers to her. The ledger blinked awake like a cooperative animal. "Good," she said. "We keep you a person today." A pause, then the ghost of a grin. "And get you something less fresh from the morgue, and more acceptable in public within reason." Kaylee approved with a single paw tap against my collarbone. "Clothes," she decreed. "Civilized. Useful." Ayami poured the not-quite-boil onto tea leaves that understood compromise. We split the cup like old partners. The heat chose my hands without sucking the room dry this time. Progress. She flicked 3 small forms into the morning air as if the world had a slot for them, which it did. Registered undead asset. Temporary. Window movement variance. Courtesy. And one that translated, in effect, to "Please don't make me arrest my own work." By the time the city's rhythm decided it was safe to be heard, she'd authored us an alibi that would hold until someone with a better badge got bored. We repaid the safe room by nudging the ember stones to a deeper glow and leaving the quilts politely folded for the river boys who used the place between shifts. The waitress accepted the offering with a nod. Her gaze snagged on my robe and did a slow, horrified inventory. "You can't walk out there looking like a misplaced cadaver," she said. "You'll scare the regulars." "Good morning to you too," I said. She shoved a stack of stamped cloth vouchers into Ayami's hands. "Uniform surplus is doing a clearance on storm dusters. Take him before somebody posts a complaint to the city board." "We're presentable adjacent," Ayami said, eyeing my ensemble. "Now we make it deliberate." "And breathable," I said, in case I forget again. "You won't." She ticked clauses off on her fingers. "Kaylee will help. I will nag. And if that fails, The paperwork will haunt you. We stepped out of the hidden door, through the storage room, and up into the diner's back hall. The wards hummed a polite goodbye. The main floor was already alive. Plates clinking, manor heaters purring, emberstone braziers giving off that moth-wing glow beneath tables. Someone laughed too loud at a joke about paladins and their big shiny swords. Out on the street, the rain had downgraded from biblical to bureaucratic, persistent, methodical, personally offended by umbrellas. The alley breathed river cold once and changed its mind, settling on sour but workable. The city smelled like cedar sachets, tin gutters rinsed clean, and the metallic tang of mana conduits waking up for the day. We emerged into one of the city's main veins. Overhead, copper bands etched with runes carried pale blue light along the undersides of awnings. Communal manor lines feeding shop fronts, tram stops, the occasional sputtering street charm. A manor tram wailed past on its rail, its ether core glowing a respectable bureau-approved blue through thick warded glass. Sparks from the overhead line danced in its wake like disgruntled fairies. A besom bike screamed by a little too low, broom-haft body humming over the cobbles, its front-mounted ether stones burning an illegal violet. The rider leaned into the turn, cloak snapping, wards whining. "Kids," a vendor at a nearby stall snorted. "Give 'em a mana rig and they think they're immortal." Across the street, a pair of early morning regulars sat outside a cafe under a dripping awning, each with a coffee and a broadsheet. The papers were the nice kind. Good stock, full animation, all the sidebars enchanted. One man's front page was doing its civic duty, a counselor smiling in an endless loop, but it was the adverts along the bottom that had decided to go off script. A little animated barber in one corner, grinning with too many teeth, leaned out of his frame and jabbed his scissors at the neighboring column. "Don't trust that tonic," he shouted up the page, voice tinny but very sure of itself. Side effects include boldness, curses, and terrible life choices. The rival ad, some slick alchemist posing with a bottle of hair restoration elixir, turned. His loop broke. He planted his hands on his hips. "At least my customers have hair to lose," he snapped back. "You charge 3 crowns for a bowl cut and a hex of confidence." On the second man's paper, a tiny animated baker in an advert for Arcadia Diner, best pie in the district, stepped right out of his border and onto the masthead, flour-dusted hands on his hips. "Oi!" he yelled across the crease. "Silence your follicle feud. Some of us are trying to sell breakfast like civilized folk." "Your coffee's watered down," the alchemist accused. The baker threw his rolling pin like a javelin, hitting the dividing line between ads with a little flash of light. Both rival images glitched, stuttered, and snapped back into their frames, forced into their original looping smiles. We moved on, which is how, not much later, we ended up in front of a narrow door on a back lane, where the wood carried the careful scent of cedar and the threshold had learned to be useful. Someone had painted a modest sign above the lintel in neat fading script. Specialty outfitting. By appointment and emergency only. Ayami knocked a pattern on the jamb that sounded exactly like a form being stapled. The chain slid back like it had been practicing for us. "Last-minute fitting," she said as the door cracked open. "Client is temperature adverse." The man in the doorway looked me over. Morgue robe, quilts, the way Kali sat with her paws crossed, owning my sternum like a deed. His waistcoat was 5 buttons too formal for this hour. His eyebrows gave a small, sympathetic flinch that might have been an apology to fashion. "Tall kedda," he murmured, "and recently so." He ushered us in with the quiet efficiency of someone who believed in tailoring as a spiritual practice. The shop was a long, narrow room lined with hanging dusters, coats and cloaks in shadow-soaking fabrics, racks of gloves and belts, shelves of boots with sigils burned discreetly into their soles. An old manaloom hummed in the corner, threads of faint light running through its frame. He produced a charcoal duster with a storm collar and a lining that drank the light. The hooded inner coat, ink-dark, simple, had weight like a promise. When he shook it out, the fabric barely whispered. The hems had already learned how to keep secrets. Brass snaps, not iron. Fingerless gloves that felt like scents. A canvas satchel with enough compartments to make a saint swear. "Try," he said. I did. The coat settled on my shoulders like the room had been waiting for me to have it. Kaylee leapt onto my lap as soon as I sat to pull on the boots, turned one possessive circle, and purred. "Mine," her purr declared, louder than words. "You may borrow it." The boots were supple black leather with low heels and runes, stitched along the welt in thread that looked like ordinary waxed cord until it caught the shop's soft light and flashed faint copper. When I slid my feet in, a faint warmth climbed my ankles. Stabilizing, grounding, like the boots were making a note in some private ledger. New owner, do not drop. The focus under my palm let out a small, pleased warble that vibrated the bones of my wrist. The storm collar rose. My reflection in the shop's front glass dulled a shade, as if the coat's lining had convinced the world not to look too hard. Ayami circled once like an inspector evaluating a crime scene. "Less escaped cadaver, more mildly dangerous professor," she said. "Acceptable." "High praise," I said. "I almost feel like I exist." The outfitter adjusted my cuffs with religious seriousness. "If you must insist on undeath, sir," he said, "you may as well do it properly." We left a small mountain of vouchers and promises on his counter and stepped back out into the rain. The city looked different from inside the new coat. Not less grim, just negotiated. Mana lines pulsed overhead. A shop front across the way displayed animated broadsheets behind glass. Headlines rippled as ink pictures looped short, jittery footage of hounds barreling down an alley after a smear of shadow. The tiny ink hounds never quite caught their mark. A brass-framed public ether socket on the corner hummed as someone jacked a courier crystal into charge. We cut back through lanes that smelled like boiled starch and wet tin, the sky thinking hard about rain without signing the paperwork. My new boots read the pavement for me. Brick grout, a nailhead, a wet leaf lying about being safe, and passed the notes up my shins in a steady, disapproving murmur. The diner had the hush of a chapel between services when we stepped in. Emberstones glowed in shallow brass bowls under a low counter. Polite little hearts in a row, the big urn on the back bar breathed steam like a choir doing warm-ups. Ward glyphs along the doorframe hummed at my aura, decided I was grandfathered in, and settled back into a neutral buzz. The waitress clocked us. Storm duster, new boots, cat draped around my neck like judgment, bureau officer at my shoulder. She made the precise face of a woman who has seen stranger things and watched them bust tables. "Table or sanctuary?" she asked. "Both," Ayami said. Somehow the corner booth became a tiny embassy with rights. Coffee arrived before we could pretend we'd earned it. The mugs keep. Hot charm flared once at my touch, considered my cata-chill aura, and dug its metaphysical heels in. The heat licked my fingers without draining the pot. I'd finally learned to draw like a gentleman at the tap instead of a thief at the safe lunch turned up disguised as stew and bread. The kind of food that forgives you for forgetting your pulse. We unrolled the case between spoons. "Ishimori," Ayami began, pen tapping the margin like she was inserting a new clause into the day. "Master Stitcher, independent courier. Last confirmed, window movement near Bank 2, slot 19. Tap 2 hound sightings, 1 unfriendly." "Crew chatter says he went quiet," I said, tasting the words, which is either a neat trick or a misdirection. "Or bookkeeping," she replied. "Somebody filed him into the wrong window on purpose." "Kaylee, now curled on the bench beside me like a small, furry inquest, paused mid-groom. "Dead like paperwork, not dead like stone," she observed. I ticked off the rest on my fingers. Focus with dual name attunement. Me and the child not child of Moss Court. Unchilding curse on record. Someone wants a production line of Oathcore wands, starting with this prototype, and they're happy to unpeople a person to tidy up the ethics hounds circling. Bureau pressure. Classify me cadaver. RA pending. If not, I get walked to evidence and labeled until I forget how to disagree. Ayami nodded, each tilt a heading in some internal index. We also know the waitress saved your remaining humanity with coffee and plausible deniability, she said, and that couriers trust the Stitcher enough to send fledglings to him for boots. Boots, the waitress echoed as she topped off our mugs, approving the category. I sopped stew with bread and let the thin soul tell me the booth story. A coin slipped through a crack in 1997. A habit of men to keep one foot turned toward the door. The solid certainty of diners as neutral ground where even hounds think twice. The patterns ran up through my ankles. "We're missing Ishimori's anchor," I said. "Home, habit, the place his hands knew without looking." "His window key," Ayami added. "If he had a favorite bank and slot, he had a route. Routes intersect witnesses." "River Docks crew," I said. The word sent a little ripple through Kaylee's spine. "Salt, rope, gossip," she catalogued. "They watch because they lift." The waitress, who had the ears of a saint and the mercy of a judge on a good day, slid a plate of pie onto the table that none of us had ordered. "River boys come in at 4, she said conversationally, like remarking on the weather. "You let 'em have coffee and pie nobody bought, they remember things." "Miracles," Ayami said solemnly, "come in tins with sugar." "Or," the waitress added, tipping her chin toward the door, "you can go find them at the docks yourself, if you're the impatient kind." We were, as it turned out, the impatient kind. Ayami slid a voucher under the sugar caddy like a quiet ward. The ledger in her lap caught 3 forms as they fell out of nowhere. Courtesy notice, diner sanctuary, cadaver present, informal witness stipend, pie, window inquiry. Maritime. She breathed once to set them, a bureaucrat's benediction. "Walk me through the map," I said, finishing the coffee with a swallow that felt like stealing time. "If you were a courier, trying not to be seen, where would your boots spend their honesty?" "South Quay," she said. "Warehouses stenciled by men who hate curves. Tin roofs. A clock that fails twice a day on purpose. A beat. There's a payphone that isn't. Looks like a relic. You punch the right pattern, it rings the wayfinder who minds that stretch." Kaylee's whiskers twitched. "Useful friend," she said, half asleep. "Laconic. Smells like rope and old maps." "Wayfinder won't talk to me if I stroll up waving a badge," Ayami added, mouth flattening. "He'll talk to you. People talk to the person who looks like a problem and smells like a solution." "I smell like cedar and embalmer's regret," I said. "Same difference," she said, and stood. The booth let us go with a sigh like a file drawer closing true. I buttoned the storm collar, brass snaps, not iron, and felt my reflection in the diner window dull another shade on command. The focus at my hip hummed a quiet chord that wanted to be useful. The waitress tapped the pie tin. "For the road," she said. "If the river boys are stubborn, feed the quiet one first. He controls the nods." "Thank you," I said, meaning bigger things. "Bring the tin back," she replied, and meant the same. We stepped out into the kind of rain that teaches you how to be small and quick. The alley's breath did that cater-cold inhale, thought better of it, and settled on brisk. The boots found grip without commentary. Kali settled along my collarbone like an argument I was glad to have. "4 in," Ayami said as we turned toward the docks. 4 out, I finished. The city kept its own ledgers. We were on our way to negotiate the margins. By the time we reached the South Quay, the air had changed uniforms. The cleanish rain of the inner streets gave way to river damp. Wet rope, old iron trying to behave, fish pretending not to be here anymore. Manor lamps watched the water from the ends of posts, their caged ember stones burning a steady harbor orange. Out on the black surface, ether buoys bobbed, faint blue glows ticking in time with the current, marking safe channels for ferries and things less honest. A cart hissed coffee into paper cups near the gate, its little boiler rune steaming cheerfully despite the hour. The vendor's "Keep Hot" glyph fought the river chill, and won by a narrow margin. 2 undead crewmen in high-vis-charmed jackets stepped out of mist and routine at the same time, like they'd been summoned by the smell of pie. Their reflective strips had tiny ward runes etched between the stripes, flaring with each movement. One had that seasoned cadder stillness, the other the slightly too careful movements of someone not long off a slab. They took slices from the tin with the sacred casualness of men who work nights and have no patience for drama that doesn't pay overtime. Ayami flipped her ledger open to a page marked 12RA and let the blue edge of an official nothing show. "Root question," she said, friendly as a fire code. "Craftsman named Ishimori, cedar lintel, vermilion door, brass hawk knocker with a chipped beak." First crewman glanced at my toe tag peeking brave under the duster, clocked the focus's outline at my hip, and then decided that bureaucracy was a religion and he was too old to convert. "If that's the old stitcher with the river permits," he said around a bite of pie. "Yeah. We do a welfare knock on the elders after big storms, make sure nobody's forgotten to stay vertical." "And?" Ayami asked. "Properly deceased," the second one said, in the same tone you'd use to report a ferry's departure. He gave me a deadpan once-over. "Not like you temp breathers." He tipped his coffee toward the sky with 2 fingers in the general direction of theology. "Certified horizontal. Union would approve if we had a union." It shouldn't have hurt, strangers naming a stranger's end. But the focus slid down into a soft minor third and something in my chest squinted. Kaylee pressed one paw against my collarbone. "Breathe," she said. "This is not your stone." The first man scratched the back of his neck, where his own toe tag scar peeked under his collar. "Wayfinder came after," he added. "Tall hat, travel coat, that looked like he's counting ley lines instead of stairs, walked up, counted steps, frowned at the weather, didn't knock." "You know the type," the second said. "We do," Ayami replied, prim as a policy. She let a small, legitimate tip slip from between the ledger pages, a stipend that smelled like an expense account, and a thank you. "You wouldn't happen to remember which way he went when he left?" "Up street," the first said, pointing with his cup. "Toward the old annex streets, where the signs forget their own names." "Appreciated," she said. We left with a cross street, a direction, 2 jokes heavier and 4 facts richer. The river murmured against its stone. Ember lamps blinked slow agreement, and somewhere up the quay, a not-quite payphone waited for someone to punch the right-wrong number. "Where now?" I asked, tucking Kaylee more firmly around my neck. She approved, curling into the storm collar like fur trim with an agenda. "Now," Ayami said, "we go leak testing." Reassuring. "It shouldn't be." She checked her ledger, flipping past forms that rearranged themselves under her fingers. "We test Ishimori's stair, Moss Court's shrine, any place our unknown fae has touched in the last 2 weeks. We see who else has been there. We see what the city's own ledgers have to say." "So a nice, quiet day," I said. "In theory," she replied. "In practice, there are hounds on the next street, and my boss thinks you're evidence. So we should walk briskly." We cut through the market district, past a stall selling bottled willow wisps for decorative lighting. past a chalkboard advertising licensed manor tats, regulated ink only, past a row of public conduit boxes where gnomish apprentices argued over load balancing. The conduits thrummed under our feet. Mana, not electricity, but the principle was the same. Power moving in neat lines if everyone behaved, catastrophes if they didn't. Our first stop was a narrow stairwell off a side street that smelled of river and old incense. The frosted glass panel in the door bore Ishimori's faded sigil and the words "Authorized Ferrywork and River Permits." Inside, the stairs creaked with the long-suffering patience of wood that had carried too many secrets. Ayami moved like she owned the place. I moved like I was trying not to steal its heat. Kali's whiskers twitched, tasting dust and mana residue. The upstairs office was empty. Desk, low cot in the corner, shelf of ledgers, a cheap shrine on the wall, a river goddess mid-step, 1 foot forever poised above painted waves, ash in the tray still faintly warm. Ayami went brisk, the way she did when reality was a form she meant to make behave. A wax-papered leaf from Moss Court, collected for tests, a ledger rubbing of the half-erased initial -M from Ishimori's booking logs. A chalk trace of the empty hook where a ferry pass should have been. 2 ferry receipts pinned under her thumb, both night ferries, both stamped with the same bank and slot. A tin of cedar ash scooped carefully from the shrine. She found a hair ribbon under the cot, court green, single silver bead. She didn't touch it. Instead, she breathed a form over it that said, "Seen, not taken." The air around it thickened, warning off future hands. At the shrine, she left a coin the way you leave apology and respect. I left a breath, steady for 6 beats. The boots sent up the smallest of messages from the boards below. Come back with good news. Outside, someone paused halfway up the stair. The sound of absence can be polite when it's careful. A shadow bridged the frosted glass. A low voice that did not belong to the building spoke through the grain like a confession. "Hounds on the next street," it said. "You have hours, not days. Permits will talk." A beat. A slight metal note, like a ring touching finger, like the word way-hitting finder somewhere in the bones of the stairwell. Then the presence moved on. My soles felt the stair settle back into itself, relieved to be just floor again. Kaylee's tail gave my forearm a single declarative tap. "Trusted for now," she said. But not followed. Good. Ayami finished her notes. The chalk trace, the ash tin, the ribbon left marked but untouched. We stepped back through the ward she'd placed on the office door with the same knock we'd used to arrive. The hall inhaled us like we belonged there and exhaled us into the street like we were rumor. Rain did that soft thing it does when it wants you to think you have time. Ayami taped a fresh notice to Ishimori's door in authoritative block letters. "Bureau, leak test. Do not alter." The paper stuck like it had been waiting its whole life to be believed. "I feel very leak-tested," I said into my collar. "Mr. Vale," she said, eyes forward, ledger tucked under one arm like a weapon. "Today, you are the leak." "Always nice to be included," I murmured, and followed her back into the rain, the focus humming at my hip and the city's mana lines thrumming overhead like a nervous system we just poked.